stalwart of freedom in this country, where Kenya is once again mourning the death of a freedom fighter after the passing of Field Marshal Muthoni Kirima. Mama Muthoni will be remembered as the only female freedom fighter who fought alongside Dedan Kimathi. She died early Tuesday morning, as Agutu Rosa reports.
The Mugumo tree has fallen. The last surviving Mau Mau Field Marshal Muthoni Kirima took her last breath at 1 a.m. this morning. Muthoni Kirima played one of the key roles in struggle for independence. She was famously known as Field Marshal Muthoni or Nina Wadonjo, the mother of the weaver bird, a name she was given by Dedan Kimathi while in the forest. She died Monday after having supper in her Pangani home with her nephews, nieces and grandchildren.
Kaenda kurara. Usiku nikasikia kikohoa. Ya pili kukohoa mara moja, ya pili nikaita bibi nikamwambia sasa kabla ya kumuita huyu mtoto ni wangu. Katuita kwa haraka, kujeni. Kwenda kwa gari nakuta shosho ametoa jaso. Tukamfungua nguo, tukampepesa. Karudi nafuu kiasi. Neno la mwisho aliniambia hivi, Mwangi usinipeleke hospitali.
And she was insisting that she's well, but she doesn't want to go to the hospital. But as my cousins who are here with her, they saw it fit that she needs to get to the hospital. And the nearest hospital where at least she could get first aid was the Radiant Hospital here at Pangani, because where we are is also her residence here in Pangani Estate, where she's been for several months now. She has two homes, one in Nyeri and the other one here. But for the last couple of months, she's been here in Nairobi, residing here. So at the hospital, that is where they pronounced that she's normal.
Yeye alikuwa mtu anapenda amani na anapenda watu. Mimi ningeomba tu wa Kenya na watu wa dunia tuweze kuendelesha hiyo nia aliyokuwa nayo.
The family then called Nyeri Governor Mutahi Kahiga, who organized for her body to be taken to Lee Funeral Home and promised that he will take care of the burial arrangements. Field Marshal Muthoni was born in 1931. She would later become the only woman to have attained the Mau Mau rank of Field Marshal. Last year, KTN News featured Muthoni during the Madaraka Day celebration special report. We met her at her home in Nyeri, where she recalled her life in the forest and how she earned the rank Field Marshal.
It is a rank given just like the generals and the major. You are given the ranks by merit. You start from the bottom and you earn the ranks.
This was a week before she shaved her dreadlocks. Before going to the forest, Muthoni, who was a newlywed, married to General Mutungi, used to give intel to Kimathi while disguised as a shepherd. The Mau Mau were in the forest for 11 years, from 1952 to 1963, but Muthoni felt as though they spent 22 years in the forest. There came a time animals would alert them when the colonialists were in the forest. They'd run in the opposite direction, which gave them time to hide. When they left the forest, they camped at Ruringu Stadium in Nyeri, hoping to be given land they fought for.
When you join the forest, there's a unique smell you have because you aren't clean and you have not been using soap. After a while, you start smelling like the animals because there was no soap, and the only difference between us and the animals was that we had 2 legs and the animals had 4 legs.
But all their hopes were shattered.
We never had someone to defend us. Just empty promises. All I have is what I have worked for and nothing from the government.
However, Muthoni later approached President Kenyatta and proposed to get a license for ivory trading. That time, the trade had not been banned. She later went back and asked for a loan. She used the money to buy a house in Pangani. She had a bar in Hola where she owned a guest house and was also a distributor for East African breweries. Agutu Rosa, KTN News.
All right, just remembering Muthoni Kirima there, and I'll just circle back, if you may, please. We're back on here. I just wanted to pick up, especially with you, the Professor, because you're intimately familiar with the Mau movement, so to speak. And when you talk about Muthoni Kirima, are we seeing a spate of this generation of Mau now fading away? Is she the last one of the field marshals, especially the women, that we can talk about? Or there are any other? And you've heard even from her sentiment that the government has done little. They're dying bitter, generation of women and men who the government has not acknowledged them. Reparations of land that you talk about here has never been realized. Some of them, they're crying. What were we fighting for? We wouldn't be on this table if it weren't for the effort, for the blood that was shed, for the capture of Dedan Kimathi, and the people like Muthoni Kirima as well.
It is always good to put things in the broader context and to see what it is that these heroes and heroines contributed to our country. There are 4 countries that are worth singling out on this continent. One is South Africa, the other one is Zimbabwe, the other one is Kenya, the 4th one is Algeria. These countries were not configured to be African nations. In fact, these were white men's, as they were called, countries. And therefore, the white person did not come here so that he can go back. These were not investors. They were transforming this as their homes and transforming the populations as their servants for eternity. And that's why apartheid would come as a justification. Now, because of that, it required a violent approach to decolonization, which you don't find in Tanzania, you don't find it in Zambia, you don't find it in any country in West Africa. But these were bloody revolutions in Algeria, in South Africa, in Zimbabwe, in Kenya. Why were they like that? Because these were not white man's, they were not black men's country, black people's countries. They were white people's country. That's how they were configured and armed. And therefore, the achievement of these people, Dedan Kimathi and the Mau Mau heroes, was basically to break the backbone. That's why Mandela was so indebted, because I'm not sure he knew what to do with South Africa himself when he chose to walk the path of liberation. But when he saw what Dedan Kimathi had done, he said, this is it. This is where we go. So he went to Algeria and so on. Now, that generation is passing on. And it is passing on at 2 levels. First, there were those who were eliminated by the British, the Kimathis and others. Then there were the second group of General China, those who survived. But then they have left us. And even before that, there were those who left the forest, like Mwariama, Bamwingi and others, who had a crash with the first state, the Kenyatta state, and basically arguably were eliminated because they could not fit in for whatever reason. And there is a lot of bitterness around that as well. Like in Meru, the generals who came out of the forest were not eliminated by the British, but by us, and so on. Then the rest of the people were actually forgotten. If you recall, it is Kibaki who literally liberated the Mau Mau. When they went and declared it a nationalist movement. Before that, it was a terrorist group, because that's how the British labeled it, and nobody wanted to associate with them, because you may not get your visa to London or whatever it was that you were afraid of. So it is the first time. I remember as a young activist with the Kenya Human Rights Commission, every 14th of February, we would go with young people to demonstrate in the T-shirts, Liberate Kimathi, the Kimathi Day. So what we are now witnessing is, with the passing on of Muthoni, is the last group. I know there's a lady in my own area, Muranga, called Joki Wainaina. She's very old and very much dependent on the little that we can give, or the people can give. Because I don't think she even lives in her home. She has no home, because she came out of the forest and there was no home. So I know where she lives in town. Very, very old lady. And this is the kind of plight these people have faced. And I think it is because our government, the first government, the second government, did not recognize. And the Kibaki government did a retro, but it didn't go as far as having a systematic intervention on behalf of these people. Yes, they helped the Kimathi family in many ways, I do know, including allowances and so on. But it was not a holistic kind of a project or a program that covered these people. The Uhuru government was also, again, very tokenist. It is tokenism. One time you want to cut the hair of Muthoni, you saw the hair being cut. We didn't know how much the cutting of the hair would cost. Then the Kimathi's widow, somebody basically say it is a
what will you do with the hair?
And so on and so forth. So we needed a state response. And why do we need this? To encourage the future generation about taking responsibility and being patriotic, about dying for this country. Because if you cannot honor the past, how can you guarantee the future?
Indeed.
This is a question.
Thank you. Let's just leave it at that right now, and we'll head over to Gabon, where the leader of the coup that ousted Gabonese President Ali Bongo was sworn in on Monday amid international calls for a return to constitutional order. We had also a town that is Bitam in northern Gabon, near the border with Cameroon, where people were gauging the mood. And the scores of people in Bitam watched Gabon's national TV broadcasting the inauguration of General Brice Oligui Nguema as interim president. Bitam is a commercial town in the northern Gabon near the Cameroonian border, and during a ceremony attended by politicians, diplomats, clerics, the military and a huge crowd of civilians, the military leader pledged to respect what he called the Charter of a Transitional Government. He gave no details. Gabon's main opposition group, that is Alternance 2023, asserts that the 69-year-old Ondo, a former government minister and university professor, is a rightful winner of the August 26 election. And on Friday, Alternance 23 urged the international community to ask the junta to hand over to Ondo. The African Union and the Economic Community of Central African States last week called for a rapid return to constitutional order. And this is what we just want to maybe discuss a bit with the panelists. With you, let's begin with you, Dr. Kanenje.
Yeah, there's been a series of coups, and as you rightly mentioned, this is the 8th in as many months on this continent. But it's curiously happening in former French, colonies. I mean, something is happening. There's some crisis going on there, but this was not unexpected. Now, the interesting thing is, compared to the recent cases of coups, Gabon is not exactly a poor country. Gabon has one of the highest income per capita on the continent. Today, as we speak, probably is around $13,000 in terms of per capita, which is significantly high. It is way higher than any country in our region. It's an oil-rich country with a fairly small population and a lot of other resources. And perhaps that may allow the junta to a much more smooth transition with regard to access to patron-client resources to placate the population in ways that perhaps they did not feel the pressure of even assuring the transition period, how long it's going to be. It's still indefinite, and so they may be around for a long time. But it's also a testament to the frustration that people have been feeling, because even with all those resources, close to 30 to 40% of Gabonese are still jobless and still live in rural areas that are relatively poorer. And so there's a frustration across the continent, and especially in the Sahel and West African region, especially from former French colonies, where the state doesn't seem to be speaking the language of the people. At a time, of course, when they feel there is an unholy alliance, especially between the leadership and the former colonial metropole. And so that frustration is being manifested by the kind of support we see from the streets for military, mostly mid-level military or mid-rank military persons who are actually engineering these coups. And so the question for us, or the response, should not be every other time to just keep issuing blanket condemnations without making analysis of what exactly is happening. Or like what ECOWAS is doing, and rightly so, in terms of condemning extra constitutional changes in government, because we should not allow that practice to become a norm on the continent. But we should also be able to investigate what exactly is happening. To the extent that you see other countries on the even supporting those coups officially, it speaks a lot. Now, for instance, within ECOWAS, when you have 3 of your countries promising to go and defend the other country, what are you going to do? Are you still going to proceed with the mission? Now, with the recent coup in Gabon, what are we going to do? You see, the Central African bloc is made up of countries that are in relative chaos themselves. And if not, then not exactly in a stable place like Cameroon, for instance, itself has had the same problem for a very long time. And of course, there are talks that perhaps Cameroon and country like Togo could be next, because they've also been ruled by either single person or single families for more than half a century. And so I think as a continent, we should also try to look at exactly what is happening and how come we have such a disconnect with the people, because traditionally, a lot of times military coups have not been as popular as you see today. Today, military coups on the continent are becoming more popular. That speaks to the disconnect we're having. But there's also another crisis. African leaders and within the continent, a lot of elections have been farcical. And so you're having a declining faith in the ability of a democratic exercise to bring about change that's going to be responsive to people's needs. And so the rise of authoritarian populism is in part being informed by the declining faith in democracy to respond to the needs of the citizens. Because we've simplified democracy to be elections and we stop at that. And those who've been in power for a long time have manipulated the art of succeeding themselves, either directly or indirectly. And so perhaps as a continent we need to go back to that, the farcical conception of democracy, but also ensure that, for heaven's sake, there is a limit to how many times you can run for president, because that's also contributing to the kind of problem we are seeing in West Africa.
And the changing of the constitution.
As well as Central Africa.
Yes. Yeah, the wanton changing of the constitution to extend the presidential limit. Let's just hear from you as well, Professor Peter Kagwanja, on this, because when you look at Gabon as it is, and the plea that we had from Ali Bongo that we should make noise about it, make noise about this. What did you expect from the global community, you having clung to power as a dynasty for the last 50 good years?
Obviously, if I were in his condition, I would also say make noise. I think it was one of our panelists, Ambassador Mwencha, the other week was here and told us about the story in Niger. The president of Niger said that if he was to speak about the real problems facing his country, he would not last a day. And therefore, he asked the African Union to go out there and make noise so that he can also have change in his country. I think later on, I think he was removed from power. The point is that the debate on the coups, particularly in Gabon, is bringing back what we had in the 70s, but in a very unique way. In the 70s and 80s, we were talking about the bad coups and good coups. Emancipatory coups and basically, totalitarian or authoritarian coups. The qualitative distinction between bad and good at that time was the purpose that the coup was intended for. And I think we're back to that debate. Let's first and foremost agree that military takeovers of power is not good anywhere in the world. The people are not, because you are armed to protect people, not to disenfranchise them and so on. So, prima facie, the African Union Peace and Security Council, the protocol establishing it, outlaws any unconstitutional takeover of government. But then, we have these so-called constitutional governments that are resting on a legacy that is oppressive to the people. Take, for example, all these coups are occurring in French Africa, Francophone Africa, French-speaking Africa. Why is this? Check your records. You're going to find that it's all about resources. And why resources? It's about resources because of the legacy of French colonialism, not in its past, but in its future. So this is not what Kagame is telling us not to do, to lament. No, no, no. The documents as they are now requires that 80% of your resources, reserves, which are supposed to go to your national reserve, go to Paris. And you can access only 20% of that as a loan, not as your money. So Paris or France keeps 60% of the wealth of all the countries that it formerly colonized, except countries like Guinea, Conakry, and so on, which basically rebelled against that 1959 58 agreement. So it is not a surprise. I hope you saw the social media creep where there's this belligerent young man coming from a corridor and is being interviewed by a journalist, and is asked, what is Niger's resource? And he said uranium. And it's what is France, natural resource, Niger. so what France gets from Niger is actually France's resource. For Niger, it is uranium. But the Nigerians cannot access there because 90% of that has to go there. So the point, therefore, is that at the base of these coups in French West Africa is a colonial legacy that is repressive and that cannot allow the Africans to move from poverty. France is well lit, Niger is dark, and so on. But there is another context beyond resources, which is democracy. And I think
right. Before we come to the democracy, we can see France is actually now battling, even when well, the question will be, is France battling under the pressure that is coming from the coups? Because now they're battling over, also pulling troops away from Mali as it is right now. So are they feeling the heat of this particular coup?
They are not pulling. What has happened is simply that this, the coup makers know what has been happening in the past, that the French battalions or regiments in their countries are the ones that have been used to reorganize the counter coups. So the first thing they do is immediately they take over, they kick out the French troops. That's what they did in Mali. That's what they did in Burkina Faso. And in Niger, they've refused, but they are actually being kicked out. Those who were kicked out in Mali went to Niger. So the big question is, where do you go now? Maybe you go to Chad. In Chad, Idriss Déby was killed trying to fight an insurgency. But in the process, the French organized a coup, internal coup, and put Déby's son as a leader, which was with the opposition leader opposed. Mm-hmm. Now, the big issue here then is that France must change.
Thank you. Let's leave it at that. France must change. Let's hear from Noami Dama briefly as we also prepare our headline thoughts.
There is two major issues here that is affecting the entire continent. One is the role of AU as an institution that help govern Africa. And unless Africa give AU the foundation and the commitment to make a difference, then it's just going to be like the previous one, toothless bulldog. And therefore, an constitutional change that is taking place must not be allowed. AU and the membership must make a really clear stand. If you do it, there are consequences. One is no trade with you, no communication, you are on your own. That need to be maintained and need to be very consistent. The issue is there is a real challenge with the French legacy, and consistently Europeans support each other. They come as a group. America, everybody, they support each other. But there is serious void in the French colonialism. The issue of governance, transferring power to the people, and where does the money go? You know, so the description Kagwanja cited is real. We still French. And then the people, the attitude, their mental, when you communicate with them, they're more French people than they're African. So what's going on here? There's going to be a change. How can Africa as a continent help in this situation so that we have some sanity before it just spill over to everything? That is the challenge that is before AU and before the continent of Africa.
All right. Before we go to you, Professor Sungi, we want to cross over to KICC where, of course, as I mentioned earlier, today is the last day, and we have delegates who are filing into the convention to, of course, deliberate on a raft of issues regarding the climate, so that the pictures will be coming momentarily as we speak to it as well. And remember, the issue of financing has also been brought to the podium on that particular arena, where we had delegates really discussing how climate injustice has been, of course, given the short end of stick to the Africans, and who are bearing the biggest brands as far as the effects of climate change is concerned. As you can see, the roads there where the red zones was declared by the Ministry of Interior, where it's a no-go zone for most Kenyans. This is a precept now for the delegates, as it were. We shall be showing you just what to... Right, we are given to understand also we're expecting the president, who will be coming in right now, and that's where we can see this, the security officers standing on guard there just to make sure everything goes smoothly. Let's just listen to Fobe as we're winding up, Dr. Sungi.
So I think my panelists have said everything that is supposed to be said, but I just want to say this is not this is the 21st century, and you know, the African person has grown intellectually, and most people know what is right and what is wrong. So I think there's a need to make sure that people are given the platform to air their views, and so that their views are heard. Peter wanted to speak about democracy, but I think all these coups raise these questions of what is really democracy. What does democracy mean? And when we say that sovereignty lies on the people, what does that mean? I mean, when I look at I've not been to Gabon, I've not been to these areas that the coups happen, but when you look at the videos, the common Mwananchi is very happy. Yeah, they are in the streets, they are jubilating. What does that mean? Yeah.
This is the people's president, Dr. Kanenja, is winding up.
Yeah, and look, Gabon, I mean, this is their own making. One family has ruled the country for 60 years plus. It was Omar and then the son, Ali. I mean, this is just ridiculous. Yeah.
As we're winding up?
As we're winding up, yes.
Yes. I think there's a lesson to a lot of authoritarian leaders on the continent. You should never outlive your welcome. Always make sure you leave when you actually people still need you at some point. And perhaps my message to those who are attending the summit: the United States is a very important player in the climate agenda. Today, as we speak, we're having a fairly friendly administration in the White House. But considering what is happening in the United States, despite all the criminal charges against Donald Trump, is tied with Joe Biden, there's a real likelihood you're going to have Donald Trump for president, and so the climate agenda may be derailed as a result. So please make the best use of this time before we get a new sheriff in town.
The Paris Agreement, you know what really happened. Your closing remarks, Peter Kagwanja.
I think the discussions taking place in the Africa Climate Summit should shift focus to the real issues. Not the diplomatic niceties that we are hearing of. And the big question that should be addressed by this summit, and that should find its way into the Nairobi Declaration, is Africa able to transition from fossil fuel to renewable energy sustainably? And what will it take for Africa to sustainably transit? Because this requires a Marshal Plan. Because the massive resources are needed for the continent, And the debate about climate financing and so on is simply, you know, a child's breakfast we are talking about here. It's not a serious affair.
Thank you. Right. Nomidama.
Well, with regard to climate impact, I remember a statement by the former UN Secretary who said, the past wants no one, but before we secure the future, we must master the present.
We must master the present, yes, indeed.
So again, I'll end with an optimistic view. I think there's a demonstration that Africa has a new breed of leaders. I commend the president for, you know, bringing this summit to Africa, Nairobi, and he has shown that he understands the issues. He has the command of the issues. And this in one way psychologically is telling our friends in the West that Africa is not behind intellectually and we know what we want. So what we need is to put these things into action, and we need to stop talking.
Thank you. All right, we can see the outriders there. The president anytime right now. That is the motorcade of the president arriving, and you can see the e-mobile there. And the outriders today actually is jetting in, or coming in I should say, with the electric vehicle there. That is the president driving himself actually. Excellent. With the outriders there, just showcasing that spirit.
That's what I like.
And there's a likelihood by 2030 that they will be banning of course the current vehicles, and we are moving to the EVs. Thank you very much for your valued company, even as the president, of course, comes to the convention this morning. I just want to over to my colleague, Jesse Rogers, who will be taking us over just to speak over those pictures as well, and have a communication or a conversation, I should say, with delegates on the Africa Climate Summit. Thank you very much. They've always said that, yes, we've not borrowed this or inherited the earth from our ancestors, but we borrowed the earth from our children. We should be handing over to our children. I just want to hand over now to Jesse Rogers, if he's on standing by.